Good evening. Evans says that he chooses the time frame between early 2015 and July 2016. He doesn't say the date in July, but it's just July. He says he chooses that. In August 2016, 1 month beyond the time frame that he's chosen, a late neonate sadly dies at the Countess of Chester Hospital in the neonatal ward. So he's not interested in that death. He's not interested in that death. The police aren't interested in it. Nobody from the hospital is. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, the gang of 4, aren't interested in it. Aren't interested in sending the notes for that death. And the spike in deaths is over 2015 and 2016. But they only want to go through up to July 2016. They don't want to look at the whole year. And this is retrospectively from May 2017 and July 2017, when he's receiving, or is about to receive, all the medical notes that he's asked for. As I said before, I believe that it's a combination of all the three. It's a joint enterprise between him, the police, and the 4 consultants about what to choose and when to stop it. Why does he stop it in July 2016? Why? Why wouldn't you go to the end of July? He went back to the beginning of 2015. Why not go to the end of July? Sorry, why not go to the end of 2016? He went from the beginning of 2015. Why not go to the end of 2016? How many crashes were there in that time? I don't know if there's any way to get information about how many crashes there were in total. That covered that last night in the last part of this analysis. Well, it's just my point of view. Maybe analysis too grand. It's just the way I'm looking at it. It's my analysis. That we don't know how many crashes there were across the period, the 18-month or 19-month period, if he's choosing the whole of July 2016. We don't know how many crashes occurred. All we know is that he's got medical notes for 32 cases, i.e. 32 babies. But he's not interested in the death that happens a month after something else happens. A month after Lucy Letby is moved from the neonatal ward. So he doesn't have to look at that. Doesn't even have to consider it, nor do the police. This is where the artificiality of the police statement that we're not just focusing on one person. This is where you get the gaps, the vision through it, when they do that, when they don't look at that death, which is just the next month. Nobody's supposed to be focused on anyone. It's supposed to be a surprise, or not surprise, but it's supposed to be something that emerges when Lucy Letby is the person that's on duty for everything. For the police and for Evans, but it's not a surprise to them. It doesn't emerge for them. They know it already. They're all working in one ghastly triangulation pointing towards one person and one person only, and no one else and nothing else. Utterly false, utterly risible. Detective Hughes' claim he wanted, it's just provably stupid, provably risible, that he said he wanted the expert to come back and say, oh, it was a bad bug in the water. He's not looking at any documents or any notes related to the water. The hospital haven't raised an issue about the potential for a spike in sepsis because of the hospital wastewater issue over that period. So why isn't he interested in the death of the late neonatal baby. That's a baby between 7 days and 28 days in August 2016. He's not interested because Evans knows that it would never be under consideration. Don't even have to look at it because it can't be attributed to Lucy. Don't need to look at it because it can't be attributed to the suspect. Police don't need to look at it because it can't be attributed to the suspect in August 2016. Hospital, consultants, Gang of Four don't need to consider it, don't need to say, oh, maybe you should check that one as well. Or the crashes throughout the rest of 2016, because they can't be attributed to Lucy Letby. And there you see the lie revealed, the lie that they're all telling, particularly the police and Evans, that they're in a state of not knowing. Let's be fair about this. It could be anyone, it could be anything. Oh, by the way, do the rotors with just the nurses on them. Oh, by the way, let's stop in July when something else happens. Or we don't need to mention what that is, just July, or just he chose it. He says he chose it, but it's between the three of them, police, Gang of Four and Evans. It tells the story. The choices they make tell the story of what they know. The choices they make leak the story of what they know but pretend not to know. People have undertaken freedom of information requests to get as far as they are believable documentation or lists of how many deaths occurred across certain years, usually from 2013 up to 2019. So we've been told those, and we've also have a list of, you can get a list of month by month. That's why I mentioned the late neonatal death in August 2016. There's nothing been garnered so far to tell us about crashes, sudden deteriorations in health. And they're really important, obviously, to the baby primarily and their parents. But in relation to this case, they're extremely important in that, are they recorded anywhere? Are they recorded, or do you have to glean them from notes? Or is there a separate database? Clearly the number of deaths are. Why I'm asking that, why I'm thinking about that is, if they're not specifically recorded anywhere, in a sort of database, in a report that the hospital has to keep, then the supplying of the information of the crashes that Evans gets from the hospital, which is given to the police, which is given to him, has been an ad hoc selection. An ad hoc selection by the people in the neonatal unit, the paediatricians. So them is going to choose it. If they're not recorded anywhere, they're being chosen by them from their decision-making process. Based on what? These are the people that have suspected and hounded Lucy for 2 years who have got her removed. So which ones are they going to choose? Did they send them all? Is the totality of 32 cases Evans looks at the totality of deaths and all crashes across a 19-month period? If it's not, why have they chosen a subset of crashes? On what basis? We don't know the answer to that because we don't know how many crashes there were. We've got 32 cases being looked at by Evans. This is what he tells us. What falls out of that is that he decides at that point there are 8 murders among them. Or he doesn't say murder, he says intended harm, but they lead to murder charges. 8 of them. One of them is dropped at a pre-trial hearing. And if he's sending back 15 cases that he's concerned about where he's written intended harm on them, that leaves 7 crashes. So that's 15. So we're left with 17 cases, a mixture of deaths and crashes that he's discounted as being all explainable, even though some of them there's infection, as there is with the cases he says that are not explainable. So we know that across 2015-16, at least according to the Freedom of Information requests, there would be another either 9 or 10 deaths. It depends whether we include this one in August 2016 in terms of what Evans looks at. So he is discounting, Evans, in this process of whittling down the 32 to 15, he is discounting 9 deaths. He's not even looking at the August one because he only goes up to July. So he's discounting 9 deaths as explainable. And therefore, he must be discounting 8 crashes which are explainable. So you've got 7 crashes where he says it leads to attempted murder charges, and 8 crashes that he decides is all explainable. Absolutely, they're fine. What we'd need to do, what we'd actually absolutely need to do, well, I suppose we could infer it already. I was going to say we need to know, was Lucy Letby on shift for any of those crashes? In other words, was it the case that not every crash that happened where Lucy Letby was on shift, Evans decided was a crime or an intended harm? That would be interesting to find out. I don't know how we find that out, because we don't know. Because as far absent of having the whole trial script and all the documentation and perhaps through freedom of information, we don't know the nature of the 9 deaths that he discounted, or indeed the 1 death that happened in August 2016 that he didn't even bother to look at, let alone discount. A month after something else happens. A month after Lucy Letby is told to leave the unit and be contained, as it were, in the eyes of the hospital, the consultants, then to be viewed as immediately contained by the police. And therefore, I know I keep repeating this like a stuck record, which leads the police not to be thinking, oh, there's an active, ongoing potential or actual serial murderer here, with victims potentially at harm any day when they get involved. It's all retrospective, and the same for Evans. And that's why there's no great concern about when's the next victim coming. It's not like the police investigating a serial murder case where they're thinking, God, when's the next victim going to happen? When's the next one going to happen? They know it's over. From their perspective, I'm saying there's no crimes at all, but in their mind, it's about getting someone for the crimes they have done, not what they still might do, because they're contained. They're contained in an admin position. They've got no access to the babies anymore. That's their perception. And the same with Evans. And that's why there's no urgency. There's no remembered urgency in his interviews where he says, God, I was really worried that they're still out there. They might do it again at any moment. While I'm writing, he's spending from July to November to write his reports in 2017. July, August, September, October, 5 months. No sense of urgency. No sense of, at least none that he shares with us. He talks about everything else. He doesn't say, while I was spending 5 months, I was wondering, oh God, while I'm doing this and I'm discovering this intended harm, bang, 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 15 times. And it never goes through my mind. While I'm doing this over this 5 months, this person could be a nurse, could be a doctor, could be a cleaner, could be an admin person. Well, maybe not an admin person. Could be anyone with access to that ward who's still there. Could be a locum. Could be a midwife. Could be somebody from the obstetrics department coming through. They might do it again. I'm gonna keep probably saying that in every video because it's so salient to me that it reveals their knowledge. It reveals that they knew who they were going after and that they were safe to take their time to build the framing device. And I mean to frame someone. The police could take their time. The police could take their time, actually, subsequent to Evans's reports, which come in November, which give them a lot of stuff to work with, and yeah, we're really on it now. They know. They don't make an arrest until July 2018. But they can take their sweet time because they know that the quote-unquote murderer isn't going to murder again. The person isn't going to attempt to murder again because they're out of harm's way or out of causing harm's way because they're not on the ward. So they can take their time. So that's why there's no urgency. They're never not looking for someone else. Is that right? They're never looking for someone else. Sorry, I tried to be too clever there. Didn't work. They're never looking for someone else. They're never considering anything else. Despite what Hughes maintains, it's a tissue. What they might have said in old-fashioned films about somebody in a court, they go, that, sir, is a tissue of lies. And that applies to Evans. That, sir, is a tissue of lies. When Evans said, oh, you know, both I and the police, we had a blank page. No casting aspersions upon anyone of any accent. I'm just, at all. I'm talking about one individual. Don't have to do the voice, of course, but he's not worried. Not worried. They're building a case to once the police are involved, those negligence claims that are just in the offing before they get involved, they're all halted. There's a spoke in the wheels there. Everything stops. And that's what, there's a newspaper report where the solicitor, the Chester solicitor, says, oh, well, we hope for our client's sake that the police will get to the bottom of it, or that they're looking into it now. It's a shock to us and everything. Before that, they were just about to pounce with negligence claims, which would have looked into minutely, which the trial obviously didn't. It might have brought it up to a degree, but the doctors weren't on trial there, and perhaps they should have been, in terms of negligence and lying at different points in time. Some of them, or at least giving evidence which was different to their police interviews, which was different to their contemporaneous notes taken at the time. Marvellously refreshed memories. That's the thing. It's a classical thing that you hear it if you watch like true crime things and detective things, is that people's memory don't become more acute over time about an event. The more it recedes into the past, they don't start to remember more and more and more about it, generally speaking. Usually it becomes more generalised, or just the very salient points remain. But you got doctors giving evidence there, and a nurse, remembering and contradicting the notes they made at the time. 7 years later they're doing that. Anyway, I think I might be going off the subject a bit there. I want to go back now to episode 63, the expert witness, the Daily Mail interview with Dr. Dewi Evans. And again, I'm going back rather than going forward, having read a lot more, or again, about baby N, child N. So I'm just going to play this bit that Evans said, which I played last night, or when I did it. Yeah, it would have been last night. Anyway, here it is.
There was one baby who screamed and then cried for 30 minutes. And whilst I'll never be able to prove it, I think the bubble went into the coronary artery, into the blood vessel of the heart, giving the poor babe a heart attack, which is extremely painful. Another baby was...
So that short section there is Evans talking about baby N, child N. So I'm just going to look at the notes I made here, and I'll have a quick look at these. Yeah, child N. This is from inews.co.uk. 3 allegations of attempted murder in relation to child N. 3 allegations. The Crown said that Letby, Lucy, inflicted trauma in the baby's throat and also injected him with air in the bloodstream. The defence said Letby committed no harmful acts and there was suboptimal care. She was found guilty for 1 count and the jury could not reach a verdict on the 2 other counts. The alleged attack, or the attack that Lucy was convicted for and found guilty for, was on the 3rd of June, and that's the one where the baby is reported to have screamed and cried for 30 minutes. And the subsequent 2 attacks, which I'm assuming were more alleged to be inflicting trauma into the baby's throat and causing injury that way. There was no verdict reached in those. Let's have a read of some things there, because even though that newspaper, they could be getting some things wrong there. I'm not sure this is one of the 3, one of the attempted murder charges, or that's 3 attempted murder charges for child N, in which air embolus was the suggested method by the prosecution. Because I'm looking at the Chester Standard here, which is reporting from the trial at the time. So this is the attack that's on the 3rd, June the 3rd, that said the attack, in inverted commas. June the 3rd, 2016, baby or child N. And in this exchange, in the court, it says Dr. Evans said that the 30-minute crying was unusual, as was the speed of decline. That's, I think, the desaturation. He could think of no naturally occurring or innocent cause. So it's a crash. It desats. He's not mentioning anything here about air embolus. And then Dr. Bohin, who's his second fiddle, who just agrees with everything he's said, really. There's more I've been thinking about the way they've done that, but I'll leave that till later in terms of what the doctors do in terms of backing up Evans. Dr. Bowen said the desaturation was life-threatening and there was nothing to suggest it was an innocent event. That's an odd thing to say. This is from the court transcript, or a reporting of what happened in the court. There was nothing to suggest it was an innocent event. That's a weird thing to say. What about, is there anything to suggest it's not an innocent event? That's just so weird. That's a weird way of putting it, isn't it? And she goes on to say, there must have been, this is the Dr. Bohin from Guernsey, who's had her own troubles in Guernsey as a doctor, by the way. Come on to that another time. And there, quote, must have been an inflicted painful stimulus to cause a life-threatening collapse. An inflicted painful stimulus, so that sounds like trauma rather than probably sounds like trauma rather than the air embolus. Nobody's mentioning the air embolus here. Mr. Johnson, who's the prosecutor, then goes on to say that the same kind of injury was inflicted by Letby on child O 20 days later, causing a liver injury. So when they're describing here the attack on the 3rd, there's no mention of air embolus here at all. I'm not sure. I need to cross-reference it with the other accounts. But in the interview with Evans, in the Daily Mail interview, he's gone for the air embolus again, isn't he? He's saying about the bubble of air going to the heart. Just want to thank Neil Ross for some of the selections that he sent me on Twitter, which are from the Chester Standard, which is one of the best resources for looking at excerpts from the trial and actual exchanges that happened at the trial. Yeah, just now looking at an article from The Guardian. This is still baby, child N for no. And this is The Guardian report, 18th of August 2023. Lucy tries to kill child N days after he was born. The newborn baby has haemophilia. That's going to come later. And a condition that causes severe bleeding. The Crown says Letby uses this as a cover to attack him by thrusting his nasogastric tube into his throat, causing trauma, although nobody ever saw that happening. So the method, they say here in The Guardian, is air embolism and a thrusting nasogastric tube into the throat. But that bit from the court doesn't mention air embolism. Anyway, let's go with the fact that he's saying that was one of the reasons for the sudden desaturation and collapse on the 3rd of June. I'm a bit confused about that. Anyway, just to mention again, there was 2 subsequent alleged attacks. I'm going to say alleged attacks, even though there's convictions for it, because I don't believe there were any attacks. On the 15th of June, so just under 2 weeks later, and both those charges were resulted in without a verdict. They couldn't reach a decision for those. Just a small side note regarding an issue of general care, just another signifier concerning child N and about the parents. This is from a Daily Mail article entitled "Nurse Lucy Letby hugged mother after trying to kill her baby 3 times. Murder trial hears." But there's a part in that article which says, in written statements read to court, the parents of baby N expressed surprise that the neonatal unit had no factor 8 for their baby, even though they were aware he had haemophilia. At one point, a specialist haemophilia nurse had been sent from Alderhay Children's Hospital to bring some factor in a taxi, some of the factor 8. So it's just another signifier that unit isn't prepared with the right medications and preparations for something like haemophilia. A Sky News report. Letby shoved foreign object down infant's throat. This is I'm reading from it. One of the babies Lucy Letby is accused of trying to hurt collapsed so dramatically that his parents were offered a priest, the court is told. Child N collapsed at 7:15 and 3 p.m. on the 15th of June 2016, and Letby is accused of using his haemophilia diagnosis to cover her tracks because the child's bleeding. Well, what about the possibility that the child's bleeding because there's been some other irritation in terms of intubation has damaged the lining of the child's throat, and because the child has haemophilia, they're going to bleed more than the average baby would? What about that? It seems such a reach to me that everything is explainable by, even when there's more likelihood of bleeding, then that's twisted into being used as a cover by Lucy Letby. Oh, she's chosen it deliberately. Oh, I know, the baby's going to bleed. They won't think it's... So she'll try, the idea of covering your tracks. When she's said to, in other cases, when she is said to be feeding the baby masses of milk, which will become apparent if that was the case, she's not covering tracks then. I mean, I'm not saying she was fed loads of milk by Lucy Letby. This is what Evans is saying. We'll come on to all that with the milk aspect of it in the Talk TV interview analysis. But it's just such a stretch, why would... You can see what they're doing. Anything that's possible to use against her, they will. There's no other explanation for anything other than criminality here, is there? All the things that can go wrong with these poorly, very often very premature neonates, and everything and anything that can go wrong. Any possible symptom that can go wrong is all down to one person. Isn't that bizarre? Well, it's just so bizarre, it's obviously not true. Following on from the Sky, continuing that, Child N collapsed again with when his parents went to get something to eat. Such was the dramatic nature of the collapses, they were offered a priest, Mr. Johnson said. Johnson is the prosecutor. He then asked, what had you done to Child N to make him bleed? I hadn't done anything to him, Letby replied. I believe her. Of course. The blood seen in Child N's throat was similar to that seen with Child E, and a doctor's note from the Times said the bleeding was unlike anything he had ever seen before. We've got junior doctors here who are taking many, many times to intubate a baby. They can't do it very well. They're unskillful, they're inexperienced, and they have to get senior doctors to do it for them. There's a bit going to be coming later, if I've got it in my notes here, where a doctor comes from another hospital to do it for them and to do it the first time, and these junior doctors couldn't do it. If you've got a haemophiliac baby and it's having tubes pushed down into its throat, it's getting sore and sore, and well, why isn't it possible that those tissues would swell, there'd be bleeding, and the baby's a haemophiliac? Wouldn't that explain the bleeding as well? Why wouldn't it? I mean, they just don't want to look at anything else other than blaming one person. This next bit from BBC News article titled Lucy Letby, baby was heard screaming before collapse. So it's obviously the 30-minute crying one. I've had quite a bit, just as a breakaway for a minute, I've had quite a bit to do with notes from care homes in one reason or another, quite extensively. And when people write quick notes or they're busy doing other things, they might write baby was crying for 30 minutes, or doesn't necessarily mean the baby was crying all the way through it. There's a kind of shorthand that's used. There are many inaccuracies, there are many generalisations. And why would that not be also the case in hospitals? I'm sure it is. Everything that Evans reads on those notes, which he keeps saying is shabby, terrible state they're in. So they're all in a bad state, some upside down, out of order, not complete, and yet everything in them, conversely, everything in them is absolutely gospel and mustn't ever be challenged or reconsidered or looked for contradictions within them. He's got tunnel vision, isn't he? So yeah, back to the BBC one. There's some real odd bits in this from Evans. The jury was told, I'm reading from the BBC report, 7th of March, 2023. The jury was told that in the early hours of the 3rd of June, so this is the quote-unquote attack on Child N that Lucy Letby was found guilty for, the two on the 15th of June 2016, there was no verdict reached. Child then experiences a sudden deterioration and was heard screaming and then crying for 30 minutes. That's in the notes. That's what it says in the notes. You've got to also factor in somebody writes screaming, another person might not have done, might have been like a short yell or one sharp yell. It's scream. You just don't know exactly what that means. They're notes, and you don't know how accurate that they represent the reality of what happened. It's possible that that's what happened, but the screaming and the crying could be for many other reasons. Medical expert, although he says he's not an expert, Dr. Dewi Evans, who was asked to review the case by Cheshire Police in 2017, said, quote, this is going to blow your mind, it just does me. It's very unusual for babies to cry other than when something is causing them some sort of discomfort, like inserting an intravenous line. I mean, these are babies that are away from their mums, and they've been taken away from their mums right from the beginning. They've got all kinds of problems and difficulties, and they've got tubes in them coming in and out of them. There's strange lighting, strange smells, all strangers all around them, not their mum, not their dad. And babies cry for all sorts of reasons anyway, isn't it the case? I mean, I've got to this time in my life, I don't have any children, but I've got to this point in my life that I know that people say sometimes the baby's crying, they don't know why the baby's crying, and they could cry for 10, 20, 30 minutes, don't exactly know why. And nothing will stop them crying, and then eventually they stop. But these are babies taken away from their mothers, and they've got all different, they're being prodded and pulled and got all kinds of tubes in and out of them all the time, strange faces leering over them, weird bleeping machines all around them, potentially other conditions that they've got, perhaps infection, other pains. They can't talk to people, so they'll cry. He's saying here, it's very unusual for babies to cry. So he knows all the reasons why every baby, he can identify. He can do everything, can't he? He knows exactly when babies cry and when they don't, and why it is and why it's not. And he says here, he goes on, he doubles down on it. He goes, once you stop the procedure, whatever the procedure is, they usually stop crying quickly. He makes these anecdotal or very vague statements, very, very definite statements, like it's a universal truism for every baby in every situation, in order to back up his theory about what's happened there, that there's a heart attack, and there's been air injected, and then there's been a nasogastric tube forced down the baby's throat. I don't know whether in that alleged attack they're talking about an air embolus and trauma to the throat, or the trauma to the throat is just in the two separate ones. It is not clear, the ones on the 15th. He says something had been done to this baby to cause this episode of screaming. Well, the baby could be feeling pain, but it might not be through anything that somebody's done to it. And crying, but it might not be anything that anyone's done to the baby. Babies scream and cry, don't they? Doesn't mean that every time a baby screams and cries, someone's tried to murder the baby, does it? That's just absurd, isn't it? He added, he told the court, while reviewing scientific papers, he came across cases of babies who had accidentally received an intravenous injection of air into the bloodstream that screamed, collapsed and died. So he's looked at a paper about an instance where that's happened and just, well, that must be it then. That must be it. He talks about a case in Swansea where that happened. Well, not with the screaming or the crying even, but he just said the accidental injection of air. Because he can find an example of it in literature doesn't mean it's happened in this instance. This is the thinness, the paucity of his thinking, the tendentiousness. This is the way he's just incredibly dangerous. This is witchfinder stuff. This is stuff straight out of the Crucible. This isn't science at all, not in any way at all. This isn't challenging your own opinions in order to think, well, what else could it have been? It's not, is it? It can't be. I mean, oh yeah, they usually stop crying. Oh, it's very unusual for them to cry and scream. They never usually do it. Therefore, there's been deliberate attacks. Goes on to say, Dr. Evans told jurors that what he saw in previous babies in this case had been repeated with child N. It's just this notion of building it up by repetition. And that's had that effect on that jury, because there's been no one put on the stand by the defence to counter it. And it's just numbers. So they said, well, they wouldn't have charged this. Lucy Letby didn't have a chance with that defence. They wouldn't have charged the person, because look at the numbers. They can't be wrong about all of them, so they have to be right about all of them. Even though clearly with the 8th baby, where there was a charge of not guilty given by the a finding of not guilty given by the judge, but the jury wouldn't have seen that because that was a pre-trial hearing. So that's how easy an individual murder charge was given a not guilty by the judge, with the CPS saying we're not going to give any evidence. But when you've got a cumulative effect of all these babies, that emotionally and psychologically overwhelms the jury, and they can't think their way out of it. Particularly when you've got a defence barrister like Myers, who has an agreed fact to say that yes, there was tampering of the TPN bags with insulin, synthetic insulin, and just wasn't Lucy Letby, someone else. Disaster. It doomed Lucy, that did. And I just can't understand why he would do that. This is something interesting in this report. It goes on to say, the court has previously heard that on the 15th of June, child N suffered further collapses and bleeding was noted at the back of his throat. But they don't mention air embolus there. So, are they suggesting that the trauma causes the collapse? Well, possibly they are. But the trauma is possibly been caused by intubation or some other condition that the baby has. Or just the intubation into the throat that's been done multiple times by inexperienced doctors. And the child is a haemophiliac child, prone to very, very easy bleeding with a very small scratch. This is where it goes on. Defending Ben Myers' KC. I'm still reading from the BBC report. I don't like the BBC, but we've got to find our sources here, some from somewhere, unless you've got the transcript. Defending Ben Myers' KC said there was no evidence of an injection of air. So that's what's making me think this is one of those cases where they've tried it on and say it's another air embolus case, but they haven't got the X-rays like they have with the other cases, even though they're all challengeable as to whether they are embolus, or if there is air there, it could have come through other means, through necrotizing enterocolitis, or with repeated catheterization, pushing air into the stomach, or with intubation as well, or with the CPAP mask, all different other possibilities. But him saying there definitely isn't that, so, oh God. Mr. Myers accuses Dr. Evans of using his review to fit the allegations, not the facts, but precisely. That's one good thing he said, Jesus. Which the medic denied. Well, he's not a medic at that point, actually. Evans isn't a medic. He's not registered. He's not registered as a... I think he might have got re-registered. He's not registered to practice as a paediatrician. But there's different levels of registration with the GMC. But when he was doing all his quote-unquote, fiction finding and storytelling and report writing, the belief is, and I haven't had it, it's not absolutely confirmed, the belief is that he wasn't registered with the GMC. He wasn't registered to practice. Did he have the right standing to even be doing that job at all? I think people are looking into that to see if that's a line of attack. It might even be part of the appeal, I'd hope. Yeah, that report just goes on with Mr. Myers saying about Dr. Evans sending an email to the National Crime Agency in 2017. Doesn't mention the date, which is really vital to find out. And that Evans says, "Oh, sounds like my kind of case." He intrudes himself. He inserts himself in the case, doesn't he? And they willingly accept him. Myers accuses the medic. He's not a medic. He's been retired for 15 years. Of touting for work. He's not licensed to practice as a paediatrician. He's retired. And asked whether he was to give them what they wanted. Dr. Evans rejected the suggestion, telling the court he was an independent expert. Oh, we know he's an expert. And accused Myers of going on a wild goose chase. Oh, Christ. Before I forget, I want to say thanks very much for the people who left comments with regard to the question I asked, because I didn't know, obviously, that if, as Evan suggested, and he says, "Oh, I can't prove it, but I think that baby was given a heart attack by the air bubble." And I said, well, wouldn't that leave some kind of sign or signifier on the heart of the baby afterwards, or some way of telling that had happened? And a number of very helpful commenters. Well, you're all very helpful. You're all great. I'm really love to read the comments, and learning a lot from reading them. A number of people said, I've got here, John Newman, "I had a heart attack some years ago. The doctors refer to them as MI, myocardial infarction. Sometimes when a doctor examines me, they'll say, 'When did you have your MI?' because it always leaves a scar." So there would be a way. So, Evans is saying, I can't prove it, but what could happen is it could be disproved, couldn't it? Potentially. Okay, and then and there was other ones here. Heart attacks leave scarring on the heart, from Haye. Lord Jason King. A post-mortem could demonstrate a myocardial infarction. In this case, the baby N lived, and that's good in and of itself, but I don't think baby N was attacked. I think it was more to do with the negligence of the care at the hospital, which got a lot wrong with it. As the heart muscle, this goes to Lord Jason King, the heart muscle would demonstrate signs of damage, necrosis due to ischemia, as the muscle literally dies due to a plaque, but primarily a blood clot. An enlarged heart, dilation of the chambers of the heart, and breakdown of the vessels supplying to the heart. So that's a lot of information there. And a number of people mentioned here, and Jacqueline Tilly mentions it, and a number of other people did as well, that the protein troponin is raised when a patient suffers a myocardial infarction, a heart attack. A blood test for TROP-T will be ordered if a heart attack is suspected, along with other tests such as ECG. So there's a whole potential range of things that could have been looked at the time. I'm assuming none of them were, because none of the doctors assumed a heart attack at the time. Only Evans can do that. What would it be? Over a year down the line from looking at incomplete, shabby notes. He can build up the story of the heart attack based on a baby that babies don't usually cry. That's what he's saying, unless someone's actively hurting them. Otherwise, they're just silent. They're silent, and unless something's actually causing them discomfort, they never cry. Or might not be crying for their mum, or to somebody to hold them, somebody to comfort them. They're feeling alone with all these lights and bleeping machines, because they've got irritations and all kinds of different pains that we as adults can feel as well, and babies they can't speak. So why does it mean that if a baby's crying for an extended period of time that somebody's tried to murder the baby? And babies scream as well, don't they? Yes, there could be pain there, but there could be pain for other reasons. that's not being addressed. And there's a lot of issues with that neonatal ward, a lot of problems, as we'll get onto in other videos. Oh, we know that anyway, but I mean, there's other cases in which there's obviously been medical negligence from the doctors working there. Yeah, the last bit I'll do on baby Anne. See, there's a lot here. It's from the Chester Standard, from an article from the 6th of March. That must be this year. The title is. I'll put some of these. I'll put some of these links in the low bar. The description. Sorry. And the title's called Lucy Letby, Unusual in inverted commas, Presence of Blood in Throat of Baby. It's from the 6th of March. She is, at this, I'm reading now from that article, Chester Standard. She is accused of attempting 3 times to kill the infant, child N. This is the one that Evans tells his idea that the baby had a heart attack, and he said, I can't prove it. Anyway, she's accused of attempting 3 times to kill the infant child N at the Countess Chester Hospital's neonatal unit. Letby allegedly made her first attempt on June the 3rd, 2016, and then tried twice more 12 days later, shortly after she started her day shift, and again in the mid-afternoon. I think that's the one where she was alleged to have made the attack like within 5 minutes of coming on duty. It's just... Anyway. A registrar doctor who cannot be identified for legal reasons. Oh, there's so many of them, and many identified nurses. What is this? What's going on? There's so many of them. Cannot be identified for legal reasons, told Manchester Crown Court how he was asked to review child N from 7:30 a.m. on June the 15th. The youngster had suffered a profound drop in blood oxygen levels, that's the DSAT, isn't it, the DSATs, desaturation, and a falling heart rate. There's no suggestion here of any kind of air embolus in this alleged attack. He said that he made 3 unsuccessful attempts to insert a breathing tube. Oh, this is the one why I wanted to read this. This is the last one I found today. He made 3 unsuccessful attempts to insert a breathing tube so child N could not be mechanically ventilated. He's trying to put the tube into the back of the throat of the baby 3 times. Can't do it. I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm just saying this is a haemophiliac child. That look at the abrasions that could be caused, the very, very soft tissues, and then the rubbing and the swelling, and it's just common sense. You don't have to be a medical person to work that out. That might cause some bleeding that can then be seen around the mouth of the baby, potentially, if that was seen. Giving evidence on Monday, the doctor said, I saw blood at the back of the throat. That prevented me from seeing where the entry to his airway was. Well, that could have been there from a previous injury based on intubation or some other procedure. He also noticed a degree of swelling. See, this is the thing. Was it that it'll come now? Was it there because of the actions he was doing? Was what he was doing and failing to do 3 times causing the swelling, causing the bleeding? Prosecutor Simon Driver, that must be a different prosecutor, must have been more than one then, said, what did you notice first? The doctor replied, I think I will have seen the blood first because that is such an unusual thing to see at the time of intubation. Keep remembering that this child is a haemophiliac. He said he could not see where the blood was coming from or what had caused the swelling. And now it comes. The doctor told Ben Meyer's KC defending that he had told the police in 2018 that he was not sure, this is it, he was not sure if he had inadvertently caused the bleeding during the procedure. Well, we have it there. We have it there. He agreed that because of child N's haemophilia, an inherited blood clotting disorder, well, it means that you're likely to bleed because it doesn't clot, there was a concern he would bleed. So you've got everything there, all the potentialities to cause the bleeding and the multiple attempts at the intubation. But Evans comes up with the fact, Lucy Letby shoved a nasogastric tube down the baby's throat. Where's he got that from? Where's he got that from? Why is he not using Occam's razor? Why? The child has these intubations and is bleeding and there's swelling, and that's understandable. There's multiple things. You're not meant to do it all these multiple times. Like all the catheterizations they were doing up to 6, 7, 8 times. Some of these doctors who didn't have the required skills to deal with some of these babies, or they were just out of medical school. Or some of them were even just trainee doctors still, being left alone without any consultants near there, with Gibbs having to ring Gibbs somewhere and ask for advice. Because they're left alone on this ward, and they're underskilled and they're underexperienced and not able to do these procedures. It's carrying on now. Another doctor told the court, another doctor, we don't know who that is. There's so many anonymous people in here, it's got to make you wonder, hasn't it? Why? Another doctor told the court that he too, another doctor, could not intubate child N. So there's another attempt following a further sudden deterioration. So they keep on pushing this intubation tube down the child's throat and then wondering why there's bleeding afterwards and why there's swelling, and they can't do it. And that bleeding and that swelling becomes, in that nutter Evans's mind, an attempted murder. You just can't. It's just insane. Another doctor told the court he could not intubate child M following a sudden deterioration in the afternoon after blood was withdrawn from his nasogastric tube. Yeah, because he's bleeding because of all these multiple procedures going on which aren't working. Dr. Hugh Maybury said, so that must be a doctor from COCH, Chester, I could see the vocal cords, but I was unable to get a very clear view because there was substantial swelling within the airway. Well, the doctor had just done 3 attempts. And the child had haemophilia. Keep saying it. The swelling was unlike anything I had encountered previously. It looked quite large and reddy pink in colour. Or maybe it's a result of very poor handling by these doctors. That's why. Maybe it's that. Why is it attempted murder? Why isn't it these failed attempts at a procedure? Here comes Gibbs. A retired consultant, paediatrician Dr. John Gibbs told the court that child M was progressing very well. These are the generalisations they keep using. The babies are stable, they're all fine, they're progressing very well. But when you start to look at all the notes, as Dr. Scott McLachlan has done, you see that's not the case as well. It's all this wash of generalisation. Oh, they're all stable, they're all doing very well. Start to look at the detail. It's not true. He says they're progressing very well up to the 15th of June, and he understood, well, really? So he's saying it's progressing well up to the 15th of June, but on the 3rd of June, there was allegedly an attack which gave the baby a heart attack. So which one's true then? They keep making mistakes, or they don't have their stories all clear together, do they? And he understood he was ready to go home. However, about 7:40 p.m, child N's blood oxygen levels and heart rate plummeted again, desaturation. Chest compressions followed, and 6 doses of adrenaline were given to stimulate his heart before he recovered 30 minutes later. Dr. Gibbs said the serious life-threatening deterioration only improved after... This is interesting. This is still from the Chester Standard. Dr. Gibbs said that serious life-threatening deterioration only improved after a consultant anaesthetist was called from another hospital, Liverpool's Alder Hey Children's Hospital. There was nobody at Chester could do it, who managed to intubate at his first attempt. They get somebody from a level 3 unit who comes in, intubates the child at his first attempt. All these 2 other doctors, one couldn't do it in 3 attempts, the other one couldn't do it at all. Didn't do it at all. So you've had at least 4, there's probably more. I don't know if there was more, but I can imagine there was more. They just can't do it. And they've got to get a doctor from someone else, somebody who is experienced, somebody who's skillful, who knows what they're doing, from another hospital, from a level 3 unit, the highest level of intensive care for neonatal babies, which would be, that would be Alder Hey and Liverpool Women's Hospital and Arrow Park. These are level 3 units, where a lot of these babies should have been anyway, instead of going to Chester. So he comes in and he does it his first attempt, and yet there's two murder charges brought for what happened on that day, with all these procedures going on, and the baby's a haemophiliac, remember? And Evans just said, well, yeah, there's a deliberate trauma that nobody sees, a violent attack with a nasogastric tube jammed down the throat of this baby that nobody sees. But that's his only answer. How does he find it? How does he know it? He doesn't know anything. He knows nothing. Evans knows absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing about what happened to those babies. Zero. And much, much, much worse than that, he tells a story about what he says happens to them, which has no basis. It's absolutely agony to listen to him, because you know what the effect, what the fruits are of what he's done. Profoundly evil. He told the court, that must be this doctor from Liverpool, Alder Hey. Yeah, this bit here. He told the court, the doctor who managed to do the intubation at the first go, he told the court he couldn't understand. He couldn't understand why 2 consultants, 2 registrars, and 2 anaesthetists. Oh my God, so there's more. See, that I did say, and I didn't know, there's more. Before we just had the 2 doctors. One tried it 3 times, couldn't do it. One did it once, couldn't do it. Tried it once, couldn't do it. Now, this is the list. This is the list of the obviously skillful doctor from Alder Hey. Comes in and says he tells the court, he couldn't understand why 2 consultants, 2 registrars, and 2 anaesthetists had failed previously to intubate child N throughout the day. So how many attempts is that then? If one did 3, and we've got 2, 2, and 2, that's 6 people. That's a minimum. So that's a minimum of 6, but one did 3. So we've got probably about 10 attempts. We might have double figures of attempts to intubate this poor little baby with haemophilia, and then they're wondering why there's bleeding there and swelling. And the doctor comes from Alder Hey and does it the first time. And he says he can't understand why these six people, 2 consultants, 2 registrars, 2 anaesthetists, I couldn't pronounce it. Couldn't understand why they couldn't do it, and he does it the first time. Guy from Alder Hey does it the first time. But for Evans, it's a murder attempt. The bleeding's a murder attempt. The swelling and the bleeding's a murder attempt. Not all these people that were doing all that failed intubation. Maybe 6 times, maybe 9, maybe more, maybe 10 or more. Because we remember one of them tried it 3 times just on his own. It's just staggering. How this ever even got... Well, we know there's corruption in it. There's corruption, I'm afraid, through all of it. Running through all of it like a stick of rock. Corruption. If this case was a stick of rock, it'd have corruption written all the way through it. It would. Corruption and... Dr. Breary, the lead consultant, our mate, Dr. Breary, the lead consultant, I don't mean that. The lead consultant, the neonatal unit, said he could not think of a natural cause why child N had multiple deteriorations on June the 15th. Or maybe because there's all blood in his throat and there was difficulty breathing and there was swelling in the throat because of possibly 9 or 10 intubations. You can't think of one. Can't think of a reason. So it's got to be attempted murder. This is insane. This is insane how this has happened. And here, to finish it off, I come to a close now. Alder Hay anaesthetist Dr. Francis Potter told jurors that he did not see blood or... Oh my God. Yeah, and I did read this earlier, but it's just hitting me like a train. Alder Hay anaesthetist Dr. Francis Potter, where the baby was thankfully sent to get away from Chester, get away from those doctors, get away from those paediatricians there, where they're not safe. That baby was safe with Lucy Letby, but not with the doctors there. We've just heard the evidence of it. Alder Hay anaesthetist Dr. Francis Potter told jurors that he did not see blood or swelling in the child's throat when he successfully inserted the breathing tube. So he didn't see it. So what was going on? So was there any bleeding then? That's a further twist. It's just, you can't. The last bit of it says, following his transfer to Alder Hay, Dr. Potter. So if there's no bleeding and then there's no trauma, then is there? So I don't know. Either way it cuts. Either there's no bleeding and then there's no trauma or swelling. That's why you could do the intubation very easily, in which there's no attempted murder. Or if there is bleeding and swelling, as the other doctors say, it's because they've tried 8, 9, 10, maybe more times to do a procedure that a doctor from Alder Hay can do straight off, first of all, who staggered and can't believe these 6 other professionals can't do it at all. Something really rotten with Chester Hospital in terms of the doctors there, aren't there? I'm not saying all of them in the other departments. I'm talking about the neonatal ward at that time. And obviously including the people that end up pointing the finger at Lucy. Following his transfer... So I'm getting a bit excited. Upset, I mean. Following his transfer to Alder Hay, Dr. Potter of Alder Hay said child end stay was fairly uneventful, although there were episodes of apnea. I think that's when your breathing stops slightly, isn't it? Which they prompt the breathing, don't they? In which he would temporarily stop breathing. Dr. Potter said apnea could simply be a sign the child was unwell, or it could have a more specific reason. He said child N was breathing for himself and off intensive care by June. Doesn't say the date there. June the 18th. So that's 3 days later. 3 days later. And he was discharged later that month. So he's out then. Once he's away from Chester Hospital, not because of murder attempts, but because of those doctors. And possibly the infection that's there, and the chaos that's there, and the lack of staff that's there, the lack of room, that all the problems, the multiple problems that are there. The baby's, after 3 murder attempts, baby's fine to go home. Because there were no murder attempts. There was just bad, unskillful, bad handling from a series of doctors. We'd heard about 6 of them there in one day. All of them couldn't do it. Guy comes from Alder Hay, does it straight away. Thank God that baby was moved to Alder Hay, not to get away from a serial killer, but to get away from those incompetent doctors there and incompetent consultants, incompetent registrars and anaesthetists. He listed them. I think that's it. Jesus Christ. Yeah, I'll just finish off. In his opening address last October, Mr. Myers, that's the defence KC, as you know, told the jury that child N was another baby who had received suboptimal care. Well, that's putting it mildly. Obviously, that's the case. You've got it listed for you there. You've got it. You've been told the absolute story. So, do you want to believe that, or do you want to believe Evans? A year later, with a bunch of shabby notes, sitting in his home in Wales, looking at these notes and saying, "Oh, I think Lucy Letby took a nasogastric tube and jammed it down the throat and caused all this bleeding and trauma."